All right. Welcome. Hello, data taters. J. Oliver Glasgow here saying your child is a data slave making money for rich fat cats and you don't even know it. Want to save them? Then stay tuned and make sure to hit subscribe and that bell thing for a reminder. Like, follow, and share. No, not that share. Share. Yeah, that's better. And welcome to another thrilling episode of Private Eye, the show that explores all things privacy without stealing your child's data. It's like stealing data from a baby. A lot's been happening in the world of children's data these days, and it's not all good. The subject is so big, we're going to cover at least a couple of elements of it on this show and the next. For tonight, we're taking a deeper dive into educational software in your child's data. This show will be a little different. We'll keep it light where we can. But be prepared to be shocked, appalled, and most importantly, take action because your child is being exploited. There are some good guys and some bad guys. We'll be interviewing a couple of the good ones. From Access for Learning and the Student Data Privacy Consortium, we have Dr. Larry Fruth II joining us. And from me2ba.org, we have privacy and identity expert Lisa Lavasser, whose organization just published a groundbreaking blockbuster report on your child's data and how it's being exploited. She'll have the scientific insights that you will not want to miss. A couple of ground rules. Our children come first. You're going to hear words like agency, which traditionally means companies like the Privacy Co-op, where our focus is hammering out agreements between big companies and you. That's good. That's what an agent does. But we have to ask a very sobering question here. Do you want our schools to consider themselves agencies, where their focus becomes cutting big deals with corporations regarding your child and without your consent? That's what's happening in perhaps a legal sleight of hand. Another is FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, where politicians way back in 1974 gazed into a crystal ball and accurately predicted the internet, COVID, and your child's data. No, it's an antiquated set of regulations about carbon paper and filing cabinets, if you remember what those are. FERPA has paved the way for modern robber barons to harvest your child's data on a plantation that we now call school. And it needs to be just totally tossed out and reimagined. Defund FERPA should be our marching cry. It permits your child's data to be shared without your consent to, quote, school officials, end quote. Well, like duly appointed state and local authorities and judiciary, sure. What's being stretched here is how many for-profit corporations are being crammed into the bloated definition of school official. Yeah, Google's a school official. Dry that one out and you can fertilize the lawn with it. You'll hear COPPA, that's Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which gives lip service to protecting children under the age of 13. But as you'll see in the second half of our show, it's largely ignored and unenforced. And for simplicity, we will use the term educators to broadly address teachers and their administrators. There are powerful unions involved, and they speak for our teachers on the front line. When someone speaks for you, you are responsible for their actions and words. If you don't like them, change them. Lastly, it's important to note who will not be on our show tonight. Well, educators, we spoke to scores around the globe over the past year in researching this show, and they were initially forthcoming. But across the board, they were silenced. And educational software companies that are monetizing your child's data. Some of them are doing it legally and following best practices, but even they were silenced by their boards. When an entire industry clams up, well, it's an industry. And as you are about to find out, your child is their product. Throughout the show, beyond the problems, we will show you solutions, things you can do right now in a matter of minutes and for free that can make things change. But If you'd rather just watch and cluck your tongue at how bad it is and not actually do anything about it, you might as well just stop watching now and tell everybody tomorrow it's bad. I saw it on TV. And you will be added to the industry. Well, for the brave souls that are still watching, let's attempt to lighten the mood a little and check in with Blank Private Eye to set the stage for our topic tonight, your child and their educational data. I've been looking for Dr. Lee Anthony for 15 years. He was one of the worst plastic surgeons known to man. 15 people ended up with noses in the back of their heads and ears in places that made it hard for them to listen. It had taken me dumpster diving in 3 alleys before I found a tip that led me to this fly-by-night rundown medical facility. This is a man that had escaped justice for far too long, and it was my job to bring him in. I was waiting in a room that was named for it. Waiting, that is. That's when she plopped down on the couch next to me holding a laptop. Dry tear tracks down her cheeks, red from anger. No, it wasn't some statuesque damsel in distress. She wasn't even a dame. She was a girl, a little grade school tyke with a problem. What seems to be the problem, kiddo? My name's Abigail, not kiddo. She wiped her nose with her sleeve, in that way kids do that's both cute and disturbing at the same time. Looking up from her laptop, she said, "This is epidemic-mandated distance learning. Software is tracking me." Being an expert in surveillance, I offered help. "I don't think it's actually following you, kiddo. You see, you have to have legs to do that." "No, silly mister. I mean tracking me is keeping up with what I'm good and bad at, and then having my record follow me the rest of my life like some cheap date from the wrong neighborhood. Tracking. Like that thing teachers used to think was unethical." The kid had some moxie. I hate moxie. "How do you know it's tracking you?" She said, "Because I flunked a math test last time, and now the software has me learning home ec. That's just sexist." Yep, moxie. "Look, kiddo, if I help you out, will you take a powder?" "You bet, silly mister. But how can you help?" I told her the same secret I'm about to lay on you now. Are you listening good? I told her, there's this place you can go, see, on your laptop. It's called the Privacy Co-op, and with your parents' help, you can set up an account and opt out of all those secondary uses of your data from those educational software shops. It's real important that you know your rights and take action. It should help you bring these cyberpunks to heel. She cheered up some and said, "Gee, thanks, silly mister. Yeah, Abigail's taking her neighborhood back for the good guys." And then she said, "Now I'm going to lay something on you. Are you listening good?" "Yeah," I replied. "Well, I have no problem taking a powder now because you stink like a dumpster." So remember the lesson of Abigail in a network where they buy and sell your secrets with cryptocurrency. It's good to have a friend who values your rights. I'm Blank Private Eye. All right. That was great. Hey, folks, we are so honored tonight to have Larry Fruth II, Dr. Larry Fruth, joining us. I'm going to bring him in right now to the studio. It's good to have you here, Larry. Welcome. All right. And Larry, whenever we're interviewing folks, we like to ask them a set of questions, Bernard Pivou's famous 10 questions. As a nonprofit, we can't afford to do all 10. We have to do a heavily redacted, modified version of it. So we only give you 4.5. Okay. So starting out, Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Wars.
Excellent, excellent. What is your favorite number?
I'd say 7.
7.
Yeah,
That's I think that's our first 7, by the way.
that's good.
So it's great. It's a good number. What profession other than yours would you most like to attempt?
I'd say professional sports or college sports broadcasting. How about that?
Oh, wow. Broadcasting would be awesome. And there are some, just incredible monolithic names out there that have been doing that for decades, right?
Yeah.
Um, yes, yes. And I come from Alabama, so we had, some of the greats there. What is your favorite flavor?
Chocolate, I guess I would say.
Chocolate is good. And now this is the half question, so don't let it trip you up.
Okay.
Who would you like to? And that's it. That's all I got.
Who would like to have dinner with? I have a short list of people, but if it would just be a person throughout history, I think it'd be Einstein to have a little conversation with.
That's really interesting. That's the second Einstein we've had in 2 weeks. I think last week it was have a beer with Einstein. So,
Don't know his drink of choice, so dinner might be better.
so Dr. Larry Frith II, PhD in physiology from the University of Toledo. Go Rockets. And science educator, a VP at the Center of Science and Industry, Ohio Department of Education. You're no stranger to the 3 R's.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've always wondered why 2 of them don't start with the letter R, but that's a totally different subject for another time. And in 2003, you were drawn to start and head up one of the world's largest leading policy centers for student data privacy. So how did that turn happen?
Yeah, actually in 97, a group of vendors got together with some school districts, and the school district cornered all the vendors, including Microsoft and others, and said, listen, we now, and this is 1997, so back then, we have all these apps in our school system. At that time, they're probably talking 15 apps. But they said we had all these apps and we're not going to enter in our kids' names multiple times to each one of your apps, knowing that half the time we do it wrong. We have the wrong middle name or we have the wrong spelling of the last name. So a project was started called the Schools Interoperability Framework. And when I came on board, I was the state ed tech director from the state of Ohio, and we basically spun it into a nonprofit. And it was directed at really building a technical blueprint, a data model, the data you need in education, everything from bus transportation to food service to student information system to HR systems to library systems. Build that data model and then specify how it goes across the wire to another application. So if 2 applications theoretically use this technical blueprint, they didn't have to enter into their applications. It was just an extension they built on their apps. These applications could talk to one another. I sort of use the analogy when you watch the United Nations and they have headsets in, it doesn't matter. The middle part of that gets all the translation done. And that's what we built, an open spec that's on the front of our website. 800 pages of light XML-based reading if you really want to bore yourself and go to sleep at night. And that's basically what the community had built since 1997. And then we sort of pivoted, which I think we'll get to, we pivoted to student data privacy out of that because our mantra of enter data once, use many times, quickly turned into by the right person at the end of that mantra. So we'll get to that, I think, in our little chat here.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the SIF, as you just pointed out, has evolved. It became the Access for Learning organization. Folks can find that at a4l.org. It's a nonprofit, membership-based organization. You promote data reuse, as we've already said. You're cutting down on the data reentry aspect of it, which, by the way, I've got a friend who's a CTO, and he actually prefers the title data janitor. And it's because that, when you have multiple people entering the same data differently, you're getting Bob over here and Robert over there, and instantly you've got collisions and problems. And there's no computer software in the world smart enough to sort that stuff out. So you got to bring in the data janitors to clean it all up.
Right.
And you're probably just trying to avoid that from the get-go, which was, for our audience that may not be familiar with A4L, maybe tell us a little bit about that organization.
Yeah, so we really morphed. The SIF Association was made up of vendors, school districts, state departments of education, as well as the federal government. And we actually have a community in North America, a community in New Zealand, a community in Australia, and a community in the UK. Each one of them with their own data models, because little nuances to terms. We use student over here, they use learner in some aspects, and that means something when it comes to applications and technology. So each one of our communities have different data models, but have one infrastructure they use to move it. So if you're a provider in the US, it's easy to get a sales opportunity in Australia. And that's really what the school districts wanted. They want to be able to use the best of breed approach, and that's what standards allow you to do. About 8 years ago, the community itself, the people you just talked about, the garbage cleaner people, the school people said, we do a lot more than just interoperability. We do policy, we do privacy, we do all these different professional development. And so the community changed its name to Access for Learning. So it's just access with the number 4 learning.org. And that's the name of the community now. It still builds that technical specification they call the SIF specifications. In the US, it's specifically called Unity because we brought a bunch of technical specs together. But that's where the community is. And it's growing quickly still on the interoperability side of the house, and even more growing more rapidly on the privacy side of the house, because that's what all the school districts are clamoring for right now.
Yeah, in software architecture, anytime you have this ability to design a specification that calls for some standardization in the middle, it allows you to then layer on some of these additional components like privacy or authentication or authorization and security, and all of those things are super important. But still, A4L doesn't really have a product per se. You guys are mostly still in the standards, right? So you're basically setting up the what is needed and why use cases, right?
Yeah, use cases. When I was at the State Department of Education as a state ed tech director, and I would get phone calls from school districts saying, what application should I buy for this or this and this? I couldn't say anything. That wasn't my role. My job was to kick vendors out of my office at the State Department of Education. I didn't want to see those people. And my only thing I told districts were use really adopted, openly built standards. It allows you to plug and play. I don't like this one, I'm taking it out, putting a different one in. Where now if you don't use standards, they have hooks and they can't, it's so painful to change applications. School districts just won't do it out of the sheer pain of it. So promoting standards, promoting them to put it in an RFP, asking vendors if they're using standards, those are the only thing we do. The blueprint's out there, they can use it if they want to use it. We have a certification program around that as well. If a vendor wants to certify, I can move this use case information or this use case information. But again, it's all up to the audience and the customers what they want. We don't do sales, we don't do any of that. It's just a volunteer-based membership organization, nonprofit.
Yeah. So, and again, in my past, when you're doing software development, the business would come around and they would start trying, they would want to tell you how to do it, right? They would say, hey, we want to do, this is the database that we want, and we want the buttons to have rounded corners and blah, blah, blah. And we'd always tell them, no, stop. You need to tell me what we need to do and why. So that was kind of the business side of it. And then the technologist would receive that and say, okay, now we're going to implement the how. This is how we're going to implement this. Now, there's some missing pieces on the how side a few years ago, I think as far back as 2015. And so is that what the impetus was for the SDPC? That's the Student Data Privacy Consortium, right, was to fill out those hows. For the folks that are watching, what is the SDPC?
Yeah, so you said it right. About 6 years ago, we were listening to our membership, and one of the big things the school districts were talking about, as well as the vendors, because we have members of both sitting at the same table, was their issues around privacy, contracting, privacy, obligations on both sides, who's responsible for what, the federal government, again, pushing the FERPA regulations and those types of things. So, we have 16,000 school districts across the United States, and each vendor had to have a separate data privacy agreement with each customer that they had. So when you look at the FERPA law, which was written in early 1970s, it really doesn't apply to software applications, but you still have to have what is called an exemption to use software outside the school, and it's called the school business official exemption. And that means that if Larry Fru's school district had all the money in the world, we would build all of our own apps. We don't need anybody else. That's not school districts in reality. So to share student data, they must have an agreement, the school district, with a vendor called the Data Privacy Agreement that adheres to the regulations of FERPA. So they can give money to an SIS, or they give money, yeah, money, but data to an SIS. They can give data to a transportation system, but you have to have a data privacy agreement. And that was a pain point for the vendors and the districts of 16,000 different data privacy agreements. School districts have no legal dollars or expertise to look at those data privacy agreements. They just wildly signed them off on vendors. So the first thing what we did was we spun up a special interest group under that nonprofit banner. We called that special interest group the Student Data Privacy Consortium. And it's the same thing. It fit perfectly under A4L because we have vendors as members, government agencies, state departments, local education agencies, and really internationally it's getting bigger and bigger with, you know, the European demands, the Australian demands, and the US demands. So this special interest group was looking at, we call it tactical student privacy. We were hearing about all these education agencies who were sort of showing districts, here's where you should be when it comes to privacy, here's where you should be. And we would ask our school district people and say, what do you think about that? And they go, that's great, that's great. And then we'd look at them and say, well, how are you getting there? They go, we don't have a clue. I don't have a clue how to get to that goal. Well, Steve Smith, who was the CIO of Cambridge in Massachusetts, and I really sort of started this special interest group under that nonprofit umbrella. We call it tactical student privacy. What can you do right now? And that pain point was the data privacy agreements. So in the SDPC right now, we have a registry database. Anybody can go check it out. If you go to privacy.a4l.org, you'll get to the special site that's basically the SDPC site. And there's a database registry that anybody can go see, parents, school districts, but it's a set of tools for school districts where they can manage those data privacy agreements. Right now we have 9,000 schools using the database. We have about 25,000 signed DPAs. You can actually get in and see the PDF of who signed it from the company, who signed it from the school, and about I think there's about 6,000 different software applications in that registry. So the schools are managing it, because you can imagine the last school district I taught at, we did it on sticky notes, you know, what our contract was, how much it was, and those kind of things, or Excel spreadsheets. This is a tool that lets them do that. And we have a bunch of other things working on under the SDPC, but that registry is the big thing. We can show parents transparently what data the application's using about their kid at what grade level of what content area.
So the SDPC asked a very important question there. The question was, why do we not have a national data privacy agreement in place, right? That was the initial impetus of the question. So you guys created one, as you've been highlighting, and you're getting more and more people to sign on. Yeah. What's the mix look like for you're membership driven? So what's the mix look like percentage-wise, vendors versus other things? Do you have a rough number there?
Yeah, let me step back just for a second. When we started the SDPC, we had, you know, Steve Smith in particular, you know, he's from Massachusetts, and Massachusetts had adopted what they were doing in Cambridge. So 50 districts in Massachusetts were using the same data privacy agreement. And Steve came to me and said, let's just do that across the country. And I'm like, I'm from a state agency. That's never going to fly. So we started things called alliances, which an alliance is any entity in the state. It could be the Department of Ed. In most cases, it's not. It's another entity, a regional service agency, maybe even a big school district. They convene the people in their state and they develop their own data privacy agreement. To be perfectly honest, a lot of it was based on California law, because that's the one that started off. And so a lot of them were based on California law. So we had about 18 states with their own data privacy agreements, very similar, but we had to let it go for a little while. And then about 3 years ago, the alliances came to us and said, this is stupid. We should just have one national data privacy agreement and allow us to put in specific state requirements from the legislature. And that's what we did. We released it a year ago, the National Data Privacy Agreement. We have about, right now, we have 33 state alliances right now. We have about 22 of them already using the National Data Privacy Agreement. I think we have somewhere along the lines of 3,700 agreements from vendors that are using the NDPA. So they love it because they signed one.
No doubt.
States and schools love it because they don't have to do multiple ones that the vendors are bringing to them.
Yeah, it treats the vendors as if they're almost like a subcontractor to the educational department, right? That gets you in line with FERPA, as they become basically a wing of your educators. Yeah. And looking at this, there was a little bit of curiosity in the agreement. It says that all student data transmitted to the providers, that's the vendors, right, is the property of the local education agency or school. And so the question is the student data owned by the schools? Is that the way this agreement reads?
Yeah, and when the agreement between the school district and the vendor, the school district owns the data. In actuality, the parents end up owning the data because they can mandate what goes on at their school districts. But the obligations of FERPA, and this is something a lot of people don't realize, my wife teaches and my whole family still teaches, and they talk about their principal talking about privacy and, oh, look at software that's FERPA compliant. Well, a software vendor can't be FERPA compliant. The school district is FERPA compliant. They're the ones who are going to get the hammer.
And so you move them right under there, right?
They have to be the one who's basically adhering to FERPA, and that really puts them in the driver's seat. These districts who couldn't have any voice when they were dealing with some very big software providers now have a voice because they got 33 other states who are standing right behind them with 9,000 school districts who are going to beat up these suppliers if they don't adhere to these data privacy.
Yeah. In the short time we have, and it's just flown by, you're such a great guest. From your vantage point, how well are these policies working? You've been doing it now for about 20 years. Do you feel like you've moved the needle forward some?
Yeah, I think in the SDPC work, very much so. I think we've moved the needle. There is not a vendor out there who probably has not heard of the Student Data Privacy Consortium and the agreements that they have to sign through it. On the interoperability side, still a lot of work to do. How you implement, you and I talked earlier, how you implement is much different than adhering to a standard. So there's some gaps there that still need filled in. We can always do more on student privacy, and we can always learn from our relatives and partners overseas as well.
Well, what can folks do that are watching right now? What can they do to get involved? What's the best way that they can reach out to you and get plugged in?
Yeah, all the contact information from myself and our crew is on the website, so you can go to the interoperability site is a4l.org, or if you want to go just to see the privacy stuff, which is usually more interesting to folks probably watching this tonight, would be you go privacy.a4l.org. My contact information's in there, and you can get to us at any time. But really push your school districts on what are they doing with your students' data. It's your responsibility to find that out, and they should be having a part of the SDPC registry and using all these tools for free. And there's one blank, it doesn't cost them anything because they're parts of alliances that statewide every school district can use it for free.
Dr. Larry Frith, it's been a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your session. Appreciate it.
Your child's data is being exploited. That's not a hunch or a conspiracy theory, it's a fact. We can show you how this happened in 3 easy pieces. They are policymakers that govern education, your educators, and the educational software companies. 16 months ago, a pandemic was unleashed on an unprepared world. By late February 2020, 186 countries mandated that all schools close. That's not a guess. Those are the numbers from WEF, the World Economic Forum. Their numbers tell us that this impacted 1.2 billion children, that's a billion with a B, driving up their software and platform use by a staggering 492% each. Well, that means if your child was already spending 1 hour a day on educational software, which some felt was too much, they were now spending 5 hours, just like that. If the policymakers caused this to happen, what was their direction to local educators? Simple. Fill in all the gaps. If you don't have software for 3rd grade spelling, go buy it. If you don't have 11th grade social sciences, cut a purchase order today. Now, to be fair, some of these policy experts knew what was coming for years. They had planned for it to a certain degree, and as we have already heard, policy groups like Student Data Privacy Consortium started working in earnest as far back as 2015. So 1/3 of the responsibility is on the policy groups. Their take on this? Set a policy that protects children, get people to say they're going to abide by it, and there won't be a problem. For educators, specifically the technology groups within education, like CTOs and technical directors of your local school boards, they were given emergency marching orders. Get the software right now and try to adhere to policy. Oh, and by the way, there's zero budget. What a nightmare. Picture this. School systems that worked diligently for years adhering to policy were able to build out 20% of the overall curriculum. Then a boss comes in on a Wednesday and tells them they need the other 80% by this weekend with no additional budget. And that's February, 3 months before the school's annual budget ends. All the money is already spent. Department heads wanted specific software that would tie increased engagement metrics, that's the time your child spends on various software programs, with assessment scores. That's the STAR tests and the like. In other words, their only measurement of consequence was the year-end assessments and not how healthy or well-rounded your child's education actually is. We have it directly from multiple anonymous sources that they simply used your child's data as a bargaining chip to get expensive software for free. And they're anonymous because they were directly threatened by their own legal teams to stop talking about it or they would be fired. So the second third of the responsibility is on the educators. Their take on this? Gain all the software and fill in all the gaps any way you can during an emergency. For the various educational software companies out there, life has been a challenge for years. If you can put yourself in the position of the average salesperson, your job is to meet a quota selling a product crafted by digital artisans to antiquated buyers still using paper purchase orders. And during a pandemic, their customers called in by the hundreds, thousands, wanting all of their software for free. Now, to save time and money, they built their software reusing all kinds of libraries. That's snippets of code that some other company wrote, which typically use data, in this case your children's data, to make their income. So they might not even know all the other businesses that are monetizing your child's data. Keep in mind, their business probably agreed to the policies governing your schools, and they have to have contracts that comply. So, in some cases, those libraries might have even been written by subsidiaries or even partners of their business, not covered by those agreements. How else can they pay their staff? If their product is free, your child is the product. So the last third of the responsibility is on the educational software companies. Their take on this? In a bad year when their business would have likely gone under, they saved the company and all their jobs by cutting any deal they could and helped their customers, your schools, in any way they could. Live to fight another day. In this story, all three pieces share two things in common. A, there are no villains here. No one was setting out to hurt the children. They were all just solving problems, really big ones, as best they could. And B, none of them want to talk about it now because they're all afraid they will be blamed for it, which means they know how bad it really is. So how can we fix this? In a word, leverage. The educators need leverage to renegotiate, and we parents are the only ones that can give it to them. Here's the simple three-step plan. 1, we get our school boards to give authorized agents, that's nonprofits that represent data rights like the Privacy Co-op, a list of all the software they use. That's easy and free. Anyone not willing to divulge this, fire them. 2, authorized agents like the Privacy Co-op provides you, the parents, with that list for your student and the ability to opt out of all secondary uses of your child's data. Well, that should be happening right now. That's easy and free too. Number 3, the school board affiliates with authorized agencies and asks all their software providers to honor their parents' opt-outs, which they have to do anyway by all those policies, and provide them the method, like a fax machine or an email. Again, easy and free. Instantly, we have leverage, and it didn't cost a thing. When the educational software companies ask for the rights to monetize the data, we can then ask them to license its use. Just like the license they make your school board sign and pay for. They need to agree to your terms and conditions for a change. Why would they want to do that? Well, because there are 128 different countries and many states that have privacy regulations they are likely violating, and they might not even know it. That costs them money. Getting our permission helps them decrease their risk, and as parents, we might be willing to provide that permission if we understand the uses and the value exchange. It's a win-win all the way around. So, how do you get the ball rolling? Well, at your next group meeting, like your PTA or school board, show this video. Or better yet, invite authorized agents to speak. Privacy Co-op's a good one. There are others. Reach out to us. We're a nonprofit and our consultations are free. We're all in this together and we need a win for our children. Oh, and by the way, when you sign up to be a member in the Privacy Co-op, use the promo code SAVEKIDS. You'll get the best discount that we offer. Thanks for watching. In Private Eye News, Tyler Durden reported on ZeroHedge.com that TikTok, the social video platform your child is likely already on and some educators use as a tool, quietly rolled out its U.S. privacy policy earlier this week, allowing the Chinese company to automatically, quote, collect biometric identifiers and biometric information from your child's content. Guess what, folks? That already has happened. TikTok already has petabytes of your child's face and other biometric data, and they have shared it with buyers and governments, now past tense. Because of this brazen move on the part of a company largely used by children, the Privacy Co-op has lowered their score from an already bad 3 stars to 2. Why didn't we lower it to 1? Well, in their privacy policy, they say, quote, TikTok is not directed at children under the age of 13. Notice they didn't say prohibited. That's because they have a special policy for children under the 13 that is worse, not better. It's shorter and contains less details and still allows them to monetize your children's data and provide it to governments where they can. They apparently have that separate policy just to be able to say they have a separate policy. This is privacy policy doublespeak that conforms to the letter of laws while allowing them to wriggle out of obeying the spirit of those same laws. They say if you want to protect your child, you have to jump through all of their different hoops, including a lengthy email exchange that you must initiate at tiktok.com/legal/report/privacy. Yeah, that's really easy to find. By doing this, you have to give them your data as well as your child's, and now you will be exploited along with your child. Now, if you're angry and you go right now to just delete the app from your devices, like all the other big tech companies, TikTok can still harvest and exploit your child's data. They have many paths. The best solution after deleting the app is to simply go to privacy.coop, sign up for parental controls, and opt your child out of TikTok today. TikTok is a dangerous app, and they are openly exploiting your child's biometrics. It's time to take action now. Natasha Singer reported in the New York Times this past week some startling numbers related to educational software. She reports that companies that market digital learning tools to schools are enjoying a coronavirus windfall. Venture and equity financing for education technology startups nearly tripled, surging to $12.58 billion worldwide last year. During the same period, the number of laptops and tablets shipped to primary and secondary schools in the United States nearly doubled to 26.7 million. Wow, investments of $12.58 billion? They're going to want a huge return on investment from our kids. Debbie Reynolds, the data diva at DebbieReynoldsConsulting.com, reported on LinkedIn that Proctorio, a piece of exam surveillance software designed to keep students from cheating while taking tests, relies on an open source software and SDKs. That's software development kits. More on that with our next guest. That has a history of racial bias issues. Experiments found that it fails to recognize black faces over half the time. This leads to students being reported to teachers for cheating. Ms. Reynolds said, quote, "This is a troubling facial detection development in educational technology software that highlights the bias problem that negatively impacts people of color. The harm is too great to have AI get this wrong. It can and should be fixed or not used to make harmful decisions about students," end quote. At Privacy Co-op, we wonder if Proctorio is included in compliance agreements for the underlying software, or if they remain completely third party, and if so, what are they doing with all of that data? Our last story tonight, hey folks, remember to hit subscribe and that bell thing, like, follow, and share. Good, we got it right this time. That's how we pay the bills. And don't forget to watch to the end because we have something fun for you. Always do. We're sticking around for, I assure you. All right, folks, we are so fortunate to have joining us in the studio this evening, Lisa Lavasser. I'm going to bring her on in. Welcome, Lisa.
Hi there. Hi, Jay.
Great to have you. So, Lisa, we start every interview out with same questions that the famous French philosopher Bernard Pivot used to ask. It's, since we're a nonprofit, we're not going to be able to afford to do all 10, so we only do 4.5. And we're just going to pick right back up with the second half of a previous question we asked of our first guest. So the second half of it, don't let it throw you, is most desired taking dancing lessons with.
Yeah, it's a so odd question. I guess I'd say Fred Astaire.
That's a perfect answer. Him or Gene Kelly.
Gene Kelly. Yeah, Gene Kelly. Gene Kelly.
I'd be right there with you with either one.
Yeah,
can
There's
you
some
imagine? Amazing stories there.
Yeah.
So Google or Bing?
Oh, Bing.
There you go. Okay. If you could change, by the way, you're the first Bing. I just want to thank you so much for being our first Bing guest.
Yes.
I'm right there with you, by the way. If you could change one thing about your education, what would it be?
I would have gotten a PhD when I was young enough to muster it.
I hear you. I think I get those like thoughts of like, could I just go back in time to like third or fourth grade and redo everything?
Oh, wow.
Right?
I don't go that
I'd be
far
the smartest
back.
kid in that class, but yeah.
Yeah.
What is your favorite smell?
My favorite smell. Oh, well, I'm going to go with popcorn.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that one. So, and the last question, when you get to heaven, who would you most like to take tea with?
Oh, my dad.
Oh, that's a great. You went for sentimentality.
Yeah.
You're going to get me all teary-eyed here. Okay. Lisa Lavasser, University of Michigan, then Arizona, Treehouse Labs, Dial Plus. Like me, there you were working on a lot of convergence, like surfing with friends type technology. And then Rethink focused on family life management. And finally, Me2B focused on certifying that apps, websites, and IoT that we all use are, for our families, respectful. So I'm asking you the first question here. What is a respectful app?
Yeah, it's a good question. And in fact, we've kind of modified, fine-tuned that tagline a little bit and the description of what we are just recently. We're building the standard for safe and respectful technology. And really what we are, upon further reflection, I realized that I have for several years now been kind of defining us not not fully accurately. I come out of standards development and, industry standards development and wireless telecom and internet type standards, which are mostly interoperability standards. And that's my background. And so I had this idea of like, well, what if we were, to create a slightly different kind of standard that wasn't focused so much on about interop, but was about behavior, which really is a safety standard. It really is a safety standard. Safety standards, some of the safety standards we know of are things like Underwriter Labs. That's a safety standard. The difference about that is that it's not really an open public forum, like an open standards forum. So we're kind of like a mashup between something like Underwriter Labs and that is testing the safety of products, and the W3C, which is an open standards forum. And we are basically creating the yardstick and performing the testing to ensure that the technology, any kind of connected technology that we use, treats us with respect and is safe for us and our families.
It's needed, absolutely. So when Me2B assesses these apps and IoT and et cetera, how do you guys go about that? How do you assess an app?
Yeah. Well, so the fundamental thing that we needed when we started was a kind of ethical framework, like an ethical foundation. And, there is no universal ethic, right? So, but we needed something like that as our guiding North Star. So what we did is we looked at a lot of different things, a lot of different ethical foundations, and we kind of kept gravitating towards, well, how do we behave in the real world? Like, what are our social norms in the real world? Because certainly those social norms aren't intact in the internet. And so we looked at the attributes of healthy human relationships, interpersonal relationships. The technology that we use, and this is one of my little sort of rants, is this is not a tool, this is a relationship. The things that we use, the apps, the services, the websites, anything that we interact with, it's not a tool. It's not only a tool, it's a relationship. Sometimes they're very intimate relationships. We talk to our technology. It's getting more and more like a human, and this relationship is getting, more and more interpersonal. So what if we measured the behavior of this technology along the lines of, is it behaving like we would want a healthy, functional human relationship to behave? Like good communication, being true to your word, not harming each other. And so we have this whole list of attributes. We call them the rules of engagement. And that's really our ethical foundation. And every single test that we've derived in our respectful tech specification maps to one or more of those rules of engagement. But it all kind of comes out of, healthy human interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, I can tell right now from listening to you that my scale in my bathroom would fail your tests. Because I personally think it lies to me all the time, and it does everything it can do to hurt my feelings. So,
but it's
my scale is not friendly. It's not.
Yeah,
It's not
well, white
respectful.
lies, I guess that's where, like where white lies fall on the spectrum of respect, of respectfulness. Again, this is a very, the lines are blurry. It's very difficult. For example, if a website automatically translates your IP address into a location, a physical location, that will fail. That will get a negative score from us. And we have had discussions with makers of websites who say, but this is a good thing. It's a good thing for users. It's telling them something useful, and they didn't have to do anything for it. Isn't that great? And we say, well, we think you should ask first.
Last month, your group took this testing to a new level, and you started doing some research specifically on educational software. Is that right?
That's right.
And what did you find out?
We basically took a look at a broad mix of schools, both public and private, across the U.S., And 38, I think, is the number that we had across the US. And we basically looked at a couple of different things, which are really, we looked at kind of a subset of what we do in the full spec, right? The spec is big and it's complicated, and there's lots of different disciplines that go into actually testing against the spec. So we just took the data flow, like data flow integrity, which means what are apps ingesting and what are they sharing? So sort of in from the individual and out to, from the first party to other third parties. And the most simple way to do this is to look at the SDKs that are in the app. And so we use
what is
a
an
tool.
SDK? That's a
it's
that's
a software development kit. And what
Yes.
it is it's a piece of modular software that is written by an entirely different organization that can be useful in more rapidly building apps.
But in many cases, right, we don't know what that code really is doing.
Yeah,
and
in
where
really
the data is going.
all cases, I think we don't know what the code is doing. Sometimes these are click-through agreements. There's no auditing. There's no I've been at software for a very long time, and we used to write everything that went into the code, and if I didn't write it, my cubicle partner wrote it. So we knew exactly where everything was coming from, and that is just simply no longer the case. The good news is we can generate lots of stuff. The bad news is that introduces risks to security and risks to privacy, and that's exactly what we saw. We saw an average of 10.6 SDKs in the apps, and we categorize.
I want to back up right there. 10.6 SDK. So these are libraries or components of code not written by the software vendor, written by somebody else. We don't know if they agreed to all of the policies or anything else of the schools. They just are. They could be Trojan horses. They could be, secreting out our children's data, and we would not know it, and maybe even the vendor would not know it. Is that
That's
right?
right. You
it was
have
over 10.
Yeah, over 10 on average. Sometimes up to 20 or above. There were quite a few that had above 20. That was a lot. Well, here's the interesting thing for me that I learned as a part of this testing was that one of the things that we looked at was in Android apps, in the App Store, it lists all the permissions that the app asks for. And presumably, if the app is asking for that, and this was things like calendar, contact, microphone, files, network, just, mind-boggling array of data that they would ask for. And anything that the app had, SDKs also, in theory, have access to. So you, as an app developer, need to do exactly what you were suggesting. They need to take some precautions. They need to actually ensure that this data isn't just, being hoovered right on out to the third parties kind of thing. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Some of these SDKs are known monetizers of data, right? Would it be safe for us to say that the data may have made it, or definitely made it into the hands of brokers at some point?
Yeah, we classified in our research, we classified data brokers as sort of the the riskiest, the very most risky kind of SDK, and we found them. We found several instances of data brokers in there.
Wow, this is explosive news. I hope everybody's paying attention to this, especially parents. So I can see how we got to where we are. If you have a software developer, they may not know what all these SDKs, these libraries are doing with the data. They just know they have a job to do. They got to meet a deadline. They cobble it together as best they can. It doesn't make sense if I'm building a car to go out and start a rubber factory so that I can make tires, so that I can, I'm going to go just buy those tires somewhere else and put them on the car. I don't really care about tires. It's that kind of component, right, that's going into the software. And yet I'm selling it to educators, rather. And I'm saying, I agree to your privacy policies. I agree that I'm not going to sell any of this data, but I don't really have visibility, or I may not have visibility into all of these components. And the data you found is actually ending up in data brokers. So kind of for the audience, what is a data broker? Because it sounds scary. Maybe we don't fully understand what they do, but can you give us a little kind of overview of what a data broker does?
Well, it's funny. We're just gonna work on a report to describe what it means, because as with so much of this, there's nuance. There's nuance because in CCPA, there's a very clear definition about what data selling means and so data broker in California has been informed by CCPA. And really it is, I guess in its simplest terms, it's a clearinghouse for data that typically there is no me-to-be relationship from the data subject or the person who, about whom the data is. I don't know if that was grammatically right, but hopefully that made sense. There's no direct relationship, and often no visibility at all that your data is going into this clearinghouse and being parceled off. Profiles are being made of you, and they're being bought and sold and used sort of at large.
Did you guys have any visibility into how it ultimately was, when you say bought and sold, who ended up with this data?
Well, we identified all of the all of the SDKs in our mapping. We identified who the company was behind them, right? So that was kind of the critical thing. A big one was Google. There was a lot of stuff going into the Google ad tech machinery. Yeah.
Now they have to tell you if it's data that's being gathered for children under 13, that starts to get into a totally different set of regulations, right? You have COPPA and others that say that you can't do that. But did you guys find that was happening after did they disclose the ages correctly on these things?
No, they did not disclose ages correctly. We found all kinds of interesting and odd things. We found mismatches in the age range and the school grades range that were there. So in the App Store, they publish, this safe for, 4 and above, or whatever the categories are that they publish in the App Store, both iOS and Android App Store. And sometimes there was a disconnect between that and the actual grades that were there. So it might say, and this wasn't really common, but there were a few where there was a mismatch there. The other big mismatch we saw is that from the App Store, again, you can click on the privacy policy, and that in theory sends you to the privacy policy for that app. What we found, however, was that the privacy policy was quite often going to the sort of the app developer. And in our report, we talk about the vast majority of the apps are written by these big app developers that specialize. Makes sense. And quite often the privacy policy would go to their website privacy policy, which sometimes
isn't necessarily their app, right?
Yeah. So, and sometimes, sometimes they were written to cover both. It was, heartening to see that. But quite often we saw that it was the website policy, and it even called out that we do not collect any information from children under the age of 13, which was very, it was just a big mismatch. That's another thing we're going to get, I think, dig a little deeper into in this next go round.
I'm looking forward to hearing from you on a follow-up visit when you come out with that. Time flies on these interviews too swiftly. If our viewers needed to take one thing away from you on this report, what would you want them to take away?
I just want them to be aware that there are risks and harms in this connected technology that we use. We were looking at school apps, but every single app that we use behaves the exact same way. And we call these B2B hidden affiliates. We also call it the invisible parallel dataverse, where they're constantly like hoovering up information about you, creating profiles about you in all kinds of weird buckets and pigeonholing you in all kinds of weird ways. You have no insight into it. You have no ability to control it. It is, however, manipulating you. It's being used to manipulate you throughout the entire internet ecosystem. And so, yeah.
I just want to thank you and me to be for getting the word out on this, because knowledge is really the starting point on this. And you are absolutely correct. We all need to be more aware of what's going on with our kiddos. Thank you so much, Lisa Lavasser, for joining us this evening. I really appreciate it. And we hope you come back.
Jay, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Folks, that's all the time we have this week. Instead of our usual funny titles at the end, I thought we'd leave you tonight with a paragraph from the Standard Student Data Privacy Agreement so you can pause it and read it for yourself. This is from Article 2, Section 1, and it's what your schools and your software providers have agreed to. We encourage you to find and read the entire document. Good night.